What's the worst coworker you've ever worked with? I work in a hospital as a nurse's aide, and my department focuses on transporting patients around the facility for tests and room changes. I work night shift, and this person started their shift at 6 a.m. There was this lady I worked with who just had the nastiest attitude. Normally, I can get along with most folks, but this person brought the whole room down with negative vibes. Nothing was ever good, and she always had bad shifts. One thing she did that upset a lot of people was take patients down for x-rays and leave them there instead of returning to our office. The big thing to remember is that even the lengthiest x-rays take maybe 10 minutes at most, with 2 to 5 minutes on average for the scans. Every morning we had x-rays to do, and I had to send her back down to return patients to their rooms after the x-ray technicians called right as she got back to our office. The instances of leaving patients were common, so I informed my boss several times in person and via email. Apparently, she had an attitude with every other department we worked with, and never informed nurses that we were moving their patients. A big no-no when meds and vital signs need to be done. One day, she abandoned a patient in the ER waiting room while they were waiting for a ride home and told no one. So security found a patient sitting alone for 15 to 30 minutes without supervision. It took this incident and a year of recorded evidence for this person to finally get fired. When that happened, it was like a dark cloud lifted and a lot of people were relieved. Oh, and she tried to get various employees around the facility to sign a form to argue against her case. Only one person signed. Story 2, I have several bad ones, but the one that drives me the most crazy is a lady who creates problems just so she can solve them. Ugh. She takes a simple job, finds the one tiny issue, blows it up and freaks everyone out, and then solves it so she can be the hero. Just take the 1 minute to fix the issue in the first place. It would save the literal hours she spends working everyone up so she can be their savior. Story 3. I worked at Starbucks for a year, one of the very worst years of my life. And while I was there, I had a coworker named Eric. I was at the till the day Eric came in with his resume, and there under his name, he had typed Architect of Imagination. Eric was an aspiring writer, but he had trouble stringing a sentence together. He could not be on the machine because he could not remember how to use it or how any single drink was made. He could not be a support role because he had no way of predicting or understanding what anyone else on the floor needed, or even what anyone was saying. He could not be on register because he could not mark a cup, and even our most patient customers would inevitably raise their voices at his incompetence. Reliably, he would genuinely look like he was about to cry. I was so torn between rage and pity. He made a terrible job so much harder, but he was just so breathtakingly, pitifully, shockingly dumb. I have never met anyone like him before or since. One night, I was thinking about something particularly vicious I had said in response to something particularly baffling Eric had done, and I found myself wondering about his life outside of our store. Was the world scary and confusing to Eric? Did it seem like life was just happening to him? I imagined him standing in traffic, looking vaguely surprised and confused, forgetting how he had gotten there. I looked him up on Facebook and was pretty disturbed by what I found. Eric did not look awkward or scared on Facebook. He looked stylish. Suave. He had product in his hair. Beautiful women in expensive-looking clothes smiled in his photos. Several posted on his wall, expressing what a good time they had had with him recently, often citing a writing sesh. It felt like I was on a different plane. It felt like I was having a stroke. So then my question became, who is Eric and who is scamming whom? The popular theory in the store was that Eric was essentially a method actor, doing research for a book or script. I came close to asking him about it a few times, but I was so afraid that I was wrong. I imagined myself over and over asking, are you a method actor or are you really and truly this stupid? It just was not something I could bring myself to risk. I wonder about him all the time actually, and who he might be terrorizing today. Story 4. When I was an intern, there was this old shrew who would call people into her office. My cube shared a thin wall, gossip, and then call those same people in to tell them what was said, etc. She would try to frame people for things she did wrong. She was so arrogant, and she refused to adapt to workforce modernization. For example, she refused to learn how to hyperlink in emails, documents, and so on. A real ray of sunshine she was. Story 5. My worst coworker was one I worked with when I was a cashier at Walmart. She approached me and asked me to cash out her paycheck. I was still new at the job and had never gotten training on how to do that function. She was sympathetic, so she walked me through how to do it. Transaction over and done. I went on about my day. I got called back a couple of days later by my managers. They circled me in an office and accused me of stealing. After tears, videotapes, and explaining what happened, they told me that apparently this coworker had stolen not only from me, but several other people that day as well. They just wanted to confirm I was not in on the deal. F Walmart, F and that bish for almost getting me arrested. Story 6. No contest. It was the literal crackhead I worked with for 4 months who was also secretly living in the office and being completely nonsensical when he was actually working. We found a mattress full folded up in the warehouse after he was let go, and an actual brand new crack pipe with a price tag to boot squirreled away back there. He and his family, yes, not just him living in the office, left discarded food everywhere, like pizza crusts in the toilet brush holder in the bathroom, what even? And they left hair in the sink, as they were obviously bathing there too, since we had no actual bathing facilities in the office. One day during his tenure, he sent an email saying his alarm did not go off and that he would be in at a certain time, which kept getting moved back later and later. He eventually showed up at 4:40 p.m., and we closed at 5 p.m., lol. See comment above about secretly living in the office. There is so much more I could go into. It was a wild 4 months, that's for sure. Edit. This blew up in a way I did not anticipate, and I have gotten a few responses suggesting I made this up. But let me tell you, I really wish that I were. His girlfriend was always around, at work, and moved in a way that you would absolutely never see her face. We thought maybe she had a warrant out or something. I think only one of us actually saw her face. She would also sit behind the warehouse bay door in their Nissan Altima, with it running all day for the AC when she wasn't back there with him. He wanted us to hire her to help him, which of course did not happen. Our warehouse area had concrete flooring that barely got cleaned, and she would walk around back there barefoot. As mentioned before, he was completely nonsensical at work. He suggested to my coworker, who scans our old documents to PDF via a feeder on the copier, that she should take a picture of each page with her cell phone and do it that way. I got multiple emails from him that made no sense at all, and I eventually had to forward some to my boss so he could see what was going on. It was a sad situation, but also a what the F situation for the rest of us. He even brought his girlfriend to the interview and asked if she could sit in on it because it was so hot outside. Now, if we did not have a Walmart and a huge shopping center within spitting distance, that might have made sense, but that was pretty unprofessional, and they still hired him. All we did was lose money by employing him. He worked on one pro bono job we did and managed to screw that up. This was at an engineering firm, by the way. Story 7. I hired a cook on a good recommendation. He was just fine for the first 2 weeks. Then I noticed food going missing. Then supplies started going missing. Then a customer told me that he had been adding automatic 30% tips to his food purchases. When I looked at the books, I saw that he had been adding 30% tips to all the credit card sales, and the cash rings were off from what should have been sold. I fired him that day. The next day, he came in and apologized, saying he was on drugs and was going to rehab. I wished him well. Then the next day, he tried to break in after close and was caught. Idiot. Story 8. I worked in childcare, and they had hired a new assistant trainee teacher for my room. Each room has 2 teachers. She constantly argued about the dumbest things and always tried to argue with me about both company and state childcare policies because that's dumb. She was also late every day her first week there. It all started adding up until I was changing diapers and she was holding a 2-year-old child on her lap. I saw a child biting another child and said, "You need to go help them," as I had a child in the middle of a very explosive diaper change on the changing table and could not leave him there. She didn't get up. I repeated it, and she said, "Well, I have this kid on my lap." I said, "Take him off your lap." She responded, "He's strong," as if this grown adult was unable to move a 2-year-old off her lap because of some weird super strength. Then the child bit the other child. Again, and at that point I was mad and told her to get up and help them now. She then proceeded to say, "So what? I have to watch these 4 kids while you just have one on the table?" As if I was somehow supposed to have multiple children on the table at once to make her job of sitting on the floor easier. Our ratios were 4-to-1 anyways. I finished my diaper change, stuck my head out the door to my supervisor and told her, "Get this lady out of my room." They did, and wrote her up after reviewing the footage of the incident. She was fired the next week for a no-call, no-show. I've worked with a lot of idiots in childcare, but she was so awful in such a short amount of time. Story 9. I've worked a lot of factories, but one I worked at was mainly for felons. The pay was complete crap, and the work tore your body and mind up. I had just graduated high school, and it was my second factory, so I didn't know any better. One guy I worked with, we nicknamed Big Matt, since we already had another Matt. Well, Big Matt was a big fan of crystal and steroids, so the dude was absolutely jacked. But this 35-year-old still lived with his mom. He said it had to do with him being a kid and walking in on her being essayed, and ever since then, he never wanted to leave her alone. At the time, I thought, wow, that would explain the substance abuse. He just wants to be strong to protect her. Well, I was a frigging idiot. 2 months later, Big Matt and 2 coworkers didn't show up, so I asked the supervisor what happened, but he didn't know either. The next day, one of the coworkers came in and told us that all 3 had been arrested because after buying an ounce of weed, Big Matt's mom called the cops on them. Before the cops showed up, Big Matt, a 6-foot some odd inch buff meth head, beat his mother within an inch of her life for calling the cops on him. The next day, I looked him up and sure enough, he was booked in a local prison. Suppose that has to be the worst coworker of all the ones I've faced. Story 10. This is about 15 years ago, but the office I worked in instituted a scent-free policy. One woman, who was already insufferable, was so offended by it that she snuck in her perfume collection collection. She'd walk down the halls and spray perfume into empty offices or cubicles when no one was looking, or before everyone arrived in the morning. This went on for well over a month or two, and we had no idea who was responsible. My coworkers and I started referring to this mysterious person as the Chanel Bandit. She was finally caught on camera in the act. She had left for a 3-week vacation and was unaware that we had installed cameras after a break-in. Some of us already suspected her, as the Chanel Bandit mysteriously stopped spraying while she was away. She quit right after she was caught. None of us were sad to see that cedar-scented psycho leave. Story 11. He would walk in every day like it was his first day, with no memory of anything we showed him the previous day. He was only focused for the first 30 minutes. The rest of the time, he would be on his phone and try to work with one hand. That is a bad idea, because I work in a restaurant. You can't cook with one hand. But that didn't stop him from trying. Then one day he just stopped showing up for about a week and was confused when he came back, only to be fired. Edit. I'm not sure if he had memory issues or anything like that. At least he didn't tell us or the owner. He did, however, like to talk about how easy our job was because he had had 4 other restaurant jobs before this one. He was only 19. We didn't make him do anything complicated, but he would forget easy things like where we kept burger buns or where buttons were on the register. He also always left trash lying around after he was done with a task. It would be me and my other coworkers cleaning up after him, and his excuse was always that he didn't think it mattered because it was going to get cleaned up eventually. He still comes in every once in a while to watch our TV, sometimes with friends and sometimes by himself. He never buys anything, but he just does it quietly, so no one bothers him. Story 12. I worked with a guy who couldn't learn new skills. When he started, he had to learn new programs and processes, just like anyone would at almost any job. He couldn't pick up on it, whether it was where to click in software to get a certain result or how to fill out a report. Everyone on my team took turns showing him the ropes, and it never sunk in. I remember being so frustrated because he could not figure out how to minimize a window. Top right corner, click on the straight line. It took him like 3 to 4 seconds to drag the mouse to the corner, and then he'd hover around it, but never on it. Super nice guy, but impossible to work and collaborate with on projects because so much time was wasted. Story 13. I worked with someone in retail. He was my boss, not a particularly bad guy, but he was a control freak who had to interject his opinion during every conversation anyone was having with a customer. This also went as far as him being in the middle of helping someone himself, stopping to lean over to my till to help me with my transaction, even though there was no indication I needed help, and I had worked there for over 5 years. This help could be anything. Telling me what button to hit next on the till, telling a customer they were wrong to have a given opinion on a topic, or telling customers that their choice of entertainment wasn't what they were after, even if they specifically came into the store for that item. He was also lazy as hell. Not a bad guy, but holy hell. I do not miss working with him. Story 14. I worked in a certain touring exhibition last summer, not Potter, FYI. Out of 200 people who applied for jobs, 20 of us got hired. We were all close-knit, had a love for the exhibit, and were genuinely interesting people, which made us feel like a family, bar one woman. She thought she was the world's biggest star for having a 3-second cameo on Guillotine. She sent harassing messages and calls to many of us. Essay a lovely guy on the shop team who had no interest, undermined the bosses constantly, talked back, and was rude to customers. When she thought we talked about her behind her back, she got defensive and spiteful. We didn't. One day, after she was knocked back for good by the shop guy, she decided to take it out on me. She started slandering me to every other coworker, but never to my face. She called me a white snake. Now I am albino, and my hair color had gotten me seriously bullied in school along the same lines as her insults, so her name-calling was very hurtful. I had enough and took it to HR, and she was fired for her actions. I could go on, but she doesn't. She deserve any more thought. Story 15. I worked with a guy who would interrupt any conversation to talk about anything as if he were the expert, and I do not use anything as a hyperbole. He truly had something to say about everything, including things he had never heard of or obviously did not know much about. When the subject being discussed fell into the category of things he didn't know much about, he would slowly steer the conversation away from the original topic and towards something he wanted to talk about instead. It was both amazing and the most annoying thing I had ever had to deal with. He was like that Wikipedia game where you start with Star Wars and somehow end up on LGBTQ+ struggles. Not to mention the conversation was basically 98% him talking nonstop. Everybody else was way too polite and conflict-averse to say anything, including me, so most people just tried to stay away from him. Unfortunately, he would follow people around. I eventually left, but I still remember having a nightmare where he was the best man at my wedding. Story 16. His name was Dan. Dan was 37, working a dead-end job as a lab specimen processor in a windowless room for 9 hours a day. He ate only Burger King, but without the lettuce because that was rabbit food. He drank literally a gallon of Mountain Dew a day and seemed confused as to why people were horrified by that. There's water in it, he would say. Apparently, if he ate corn, he would vomit and have to go to the hospital. He told me he firmly believed that man and dinosaur roamed the earth at the same time, along with many other theories that came straight from his gut. One day before the 2016 election, we got into a political argument where he said, "If Bernie Sanders is elected president, there will be a civil war, and I will not hesitate to kill you and your family." Dan was fired. I got out of there as soon as I could. Don't be like Dan. Story 17. My current supervisor and head supervisor work in the MRDD field. I got a call one Tuesday morning and my boss was slurring her words, telling me to bring her hangover food. I showed up about 20 minutes before my scheduled shift, and when I walked in, she could not stand up straight and all you could smell was alcohol. Our head supervisor left and she fully confessed that she was absolutely trashed and had been drinking from 9 p.m. Monday night to 12 p.m. Tuesday with our head supervisor on the clock. She then proceeded to sleep, leaving me to care for 4 individuals for 8 hours while she was still on the clock. That following Thursday, I showed up to work again, and she got in my face. Again, it smelled like a bar. She told me that if I told anyone, I would lose my job and licenses. That weekend, she tried to force me to work a 3 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift because someone had a fever and could not come in. When I told her I was not required to cover anything outside my shift without prior consent, she screamed in my face and told me to just leave. I called my head supervisor, and I still have not heard anything. 2 weeks later, I ended up breaking my foot on my weekend off. I called her from the hospital Sunday afternoon, telling her I needed the next 48 hours off to start healing, and she refused, putting me on light duty. I showed up Monday afternoon, 26 hours after receiving proper medical care for my foot. When I mentioned my foot hurt, she said, "Well, a chunky girl of your size can't carry your own weight. I'm not small, but I am happy with myself, and my weight has nothing to do with breaking a bone less than 48 hours ago." She then left me alone with a seizure patient who put herself on the floor, and I had to pick her up. She returned around 9:30 p.m. to put them to bed, and she was drinking again. Story 18. Back when I worked at a restaurant, I was friends with the bartender, a chill dude, right up until they made him manager. That small amount of power, plus the increased pressure, made him angry all the time. He screamed at me that I was crap at my job because I did not do something I had never been asked to do before. He made me miss my last bus so I could not get home. It was pitch black outside and I cried on the bench outside the restaurant. Worst working day and worst coworker. It took me a long time to get over that and realize I was not a bad worker. He was just stressed and did not know how to handle it. Story 19. For a few summers in high school and college, I worked as a groundskeeper at a large hotel complex. As a seasonal employee, I was paired up with the year-round full-time groundskeeper during my shifts, and then he and I would work alternate weekends. He retired suddenly while I was at school, so by the time I returned for the summer, they had hired a replacement. Ed was a lateral hire, having previously worked in the hotel's kitchens. He was in his 50s, but based on his maturity and intelligence, he wasn't more than a teenager. I heard some rumblings about him being a little off, but didn't pay them much mind since I knew I'd be spending the whole summer with this guy and didn't want to go into our relationship with any preconceptions. The first thing I discovered was that he was dumber than a box of rocks. He used words he didn't know the meaning of, so of course they didn't make sense the way he used them. Whenever the subject of music came up, he never failed to mention that he didn't like that rap crap BS 15 years later, and I can still hear him saying that phrase. He laughed at the dumbest little things. He put an ice cube on my seat in our golf cart, which we used to get around the property, and I'd sit on it, notice it instantly, and stand up to brush the seat off. My pants wouldn't even get wet, but he'd laugh his A off as if it were the prank of the century. Our golf carts had roofs on them. It only takes one time to bang your head on it to avoid doing it again. But not for Ed. The first time he hit his head was a doozy. He had to stand crouched over for a few minutes to regain his composure. He whacked it so hard. I felt really bad for him. A few days later, he did it again, and I was again concerned, but it became a weekly occurrence. My reactions went from concerned to confused, how does this guy keep doing this, to amused. By the end of the summer, I would lose my crap laughing whenever he hit his head. There was no other way to react than to laugh. If this guy didn't learn after the first dozen times he hit his head, then there was no hope for him. One time, Ed was helping the boss move an extension ladder. They lifted it and put it on the roof of a golf cart. The ladder was longer than the cart, so it stuck out both the front and back sides. No sooner had he placed his end on the roof than he turned away, then turned back, and walked face first into the ladder, exactly where he just put it. My boss asked if he was okay, but as his mind processed what just happened, he asked Ed how he ran into the ladder he had just placed there. His immaturity was the next thing I noticed. Inappropriate jokes and comments came at a frequency that made me feel like I was back in middle school. One day, we had these iron stakes in the back of the cart. We were driving around, and Ed grabbed one of the stakes and let it drag on the ground, like you would a stick on a fence as you walk by to make noise, making a scraping sound on the asphalt. It was annoying annoying as hell. I asked him to stop, so he lifted it up, waited 10 seconds, then started dragging it again. I asked him to stop again, which he did, only to restart shortly after. That particular day, I wasn't in the mood for his nonsense, so I stopped the cart in the middle of the street, took the key, and walked away. He ran after me, begging me to come back and promising he wouldn't do it again. Fortunately, he didn't. My coworkers told me stories about how he behaved on the days I wasn't there. More of the same. Constantly tripping over stuff, falling downstairs, banging his head. They eventually started referring to him as Homer Simpson because he was such a doofus. I could feel myself getting dumber every day I spent with him. His childish antics drove me insane. By the end of the summer, I had had enough. I decided to find a new job for the following year because I knew I couldn't spend another summer with him. Last I heard, Ed got injured by getting his arm stuck in the cardboard baler and couldn't work for several months. How he did that, I will never know since you can't turn those machines on unless the safety gate is closed, so it's not like it was running when it happened. He was ultimately never medically cleared to return to work, so I don't know what became of him. I was Facebook friends with him when I was in college, but got sick of all the Candy Crush and Farmville invitations, so I just unfriended him. Story 20. I worked with a teacher who sat at his desk the entire year. Kids walked in and out whenever they wanted to. They did practically no work. He told racist jokes and was terrible with the students. One day, I was sitting in the teacher workroom, and another teacher noticed a phone on the counter. She asked if it was mine. When I said no, we looked at the lock screen to see whose it might be. The picture on the lock screen was of someone's bare chest. A few minutes later, the bad coworker walked in and picked it up. Needless to say, he was let go. Story 21. About 2 years ago, I started work as a receptionist in an audiology clinic. We do hearing tests and hearing aids. The only thing I knew about hearing aids before taking this job was that my grandpa had one. 8 months after I started, so at this point I had 8 months of experience with anything related to hearing. They hired a new provider who I would later discover knew nothing about anything. Not hearing aids, not basic job knowledge, not how to handle talking to bosses, patients, or people over the phone. For example, we had one patient who left her hearing aids with us to be fixed. She would call occasionally to check on them, and I would say, I'll ask the provider to call you and update you, which I did. 4 months later, the same patient called, and I discovered the provider had been ignoring me every time I told her to call, and she simply never did. Another example, she could never, ever remember to clock in and out, ever. It was a daily struggle. She would have to send in time card adjustments almost every day and then complain to me when our boss was annoyed. She didn't know how to fill out repair forms, so every time we had to send something out, I had to double check that everything was filled out correctly and legibly. Again, she was the credentialed provider, and I was the receptionist with 8 months of experience with hearing aids. She wouldn't complete chart notes for weeks. She would have patient charts stacked in the corner of her office for days, forget to make chart notes, put in incorrect dates, or spell patients' names wrong, so I had to double check every chart before putting it back on the shelves. If she didn't know what to do with a patient, which was common, she would just do nothing. So I had to pick up all of that slack, deal with the patients, take their complaints, and talk to manufacturers over the phone. There were even times when I had to recommend hearing aids to patients because she simply wouldn't. She constantly forgot to have patients sign paperwork. I would put a post-it on the chart that said, "Patient must sign," and I would tell her beforehand, yet she would still let them leave without signing purchase agreements or medical waivers. She could not keep track of time. She would go 10 to 30 minutes over appointment times, and I had to deal with the angry patients. I would tell her, "Hey, time warning," and she'd say, "Okay, then ignore me." She would keep elderly patients in for new patient appointments for 2 or more hours when they were usually scheduled for 90-minute visits. Sometimes the patients had to tell her they needed to leave because they were tired or their feet hurt. These people were in their 80s, and the best part, everything that went wrong was my fault. She would blame me for her poor job performance, her inability to retain patients, and her failure to sell hearing aids. Everything. After 6 months of this, I finally spoke up. I hadn't said anything up to this point because she was a really nice person apart from work, and I felt bad for her. But everyone has their limits, and our company was starting to notice her because she wasn't making them any money. She was put on daily Zoom meetings with our boss and trainers. When this happened, they finally realized why she was making almost zero money. She was incredibly incompetent, obviously, and they fired her. They told us they were shutting down the clinic, but instead, they hired a new provider with far more education and experience. Someone confident and young who actually knows how an iPhone works. The only thing I got from this experience was a 30-cent raise at the end of the year and a major increase in my anxiety medication dosage. Also, I guess I learned a lot about my job. The new provider and I are now BFFs, so my job is much more enjoyable. Story 22. He just wouldn't work. Just wouldn't. This was in a research lab. He was a visiting researcher from another country, and he spent a lot of time asking tons of non-work related questions to the point of disrupting others' work. Over the course of a year, he designed one very basic experiment, but didn't actually do it. Just designed it. He was apparently above doing bench bench work, he picked fights with everyone doing any experiment related to the one he was planning because he didn't want to share credit with anyone. He wouldn't clean up after himself or pick up things from the floor. He actually called me in from another room because he wouldn't take a stringless tea bag out of his mug. On a different occasion, he knocked some items off a hanger on the back of the door and refused to pick them up. It was like working with a child. He must have had servants where he lived. I don't know how, but he was there for his PhD. The boss fired him. He was one of only 2 people in her 30-plus year career that she had ever fired. Story 23. I worked at a grocery store, and one of the scheduling ladies was a total C-bomb. When you work at a grocery store, you expect to have shifts all over the place. That's part of the job, so I'm not complaining about that. About 2 years into working, there I had an accident and broke my thumb and hand. Not at work, unfortunately, and needed surgery. I went to apply for employment insurance, EI, and they required a record of employment, ROE. I asked the woman in charge of that, the aforementioned scheduling lady, if she would mind sending it off so I could still pay rent while I was off work recovering. She told me she already had. I went back to the EI office and they still had no ROE. I returned to my old work and asked her a second time. This happened repeatedly until I asked her 4 times. As a result, I had to borrow money from my parents for Christmas in order to pay my rent. Story 24. My receptionist is the most useless person I've ever met. She ignores the phones while playing on her personal device and takes countless personal calls. She also handles all her personal business on the work computer, from shopping to bills. On any given day, she constantly finds ways to avoid work by getting up and chatting with anyone patient enough to listen. My personal favorite, she does not take an ounce of criticism whatsoever. Every question or suggestion is considered an attack or bullying in her opinion. She has filed countless HR complaints because other employees suggested she focus on her work. Countless meetings and hours have been wasted trying to appease her. Her last day is coming in a few weeks, and I am going to celebrate. From the bottom of my heart and every fiber of my being, screw you. Story 25. At my first job as a vet assistant at a small animal clinic, there was a middle-aged woman who primarily worked as the receptionist. She was constantly snarky and rude toward me and my work. After I shared with another coworker that I was planning to go to school to become a vet, she laughed and said, "I don't think I could see you as a vet." I was only 16 years old, mind you. I had big dreams and goals and was taking solid steps toward achieving them. I remember standing there, taken aback, holding back tears and any sign of being upset. I was accepted to vet school at age 18, and I am still actively pursuing that dream. Guess I'm going to prove her wrong. Edit to clarify. I was accepted into an early entry program for vet school. That is how I was accepted at 18. I am currently in pre-vet undergrad, but I have been pre-accepted to vet school with a guaranteed seat in my school's College of Veterinary Medicine once I finish my prerequisites. No more application required. Story 26. Frigging Jamie. Her picture belonged next to passive-aggressive in the dictionary. She knew how to stay on the boss's good side, but treated most everyone else like dirt. She would intentionally ignore your attempts to communicate with her about important work matters, then turn around and claim that you were the one being difficult. Whenever you pointed out one of her mistakes, however small, she would throw a temper. Tantrum like a little kid. I haven't worked with her for many years now, and I sincerely hope I can eventually forget what she looks like. Story 27. 3-person department. Myself, an awesome dude, and this terrible new coworker. She was fresh out of college and believed she was smarter than both of us because of that. She completely discounted anyone's opinions except her own, and that of one manager who let her do whatever she wanted. She was the worst one-upper I had ever met. Even for stupid things like going to a coffee stand, she'd chime in and say how her friends work there and know her order by heart. Just stupid stuff. She thought she was adorable and charming, but was incredibly grating and worthless. She constantly messed up on her job, but if you tried to help or give constructive feedback, she'd cry and go to her wet nurse, the one manager who liked her. She lasted almost 4 years, which blew my mind. She was furloughed at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, but will not be returning, as her position is being taken by the owner's daughter. The company split about 2 years ago. I went to the new company, and she and the awesome dude stayed at the old one. Story 28. In the interview, she said something along the lines of, "You're quite young. How do we know you'll be responsible enough to work with our team?" As if she was running an Olympic team and not a fast food joint. I know this isn't an unusual question, but her attitude spoke louder than her words. At the time, I was technically homeless, a young teenager staying in a shelter. I explained this as my motivation. I needed a day program, wanted a permanent place to live, and hoped to someday be financially stable enough to return to school. Before I became homeless, I had amazing grades, volunteered with the Red Cross and a few other organizations, babysat for many families, and had completed a babysitting course and first aid training. So it wasn't like I had a terrible resume. Yet she talked down to me as if I should be kissing the ground she walked on just for providing me an interview. A week or two went by with no word, so I assumed I didn't get the job. On the third week, I got a call and was told to come in later that week for training. Once again, her attitude was commanding. She didn't ask or offer, she demanded that I be there. I had already gotten another job, but was willing to work 2 jobs to achieve my goals. On my very first day, my first shift, I was given the most basic instructions. Read the employee handbook, then come get her. I finished quickly. She was adamant I must be illiterate because I had gone so fast. She pointed to random words and demanded I read them. It was annoying, but my goals were bigger, homeless and all. She walked me over to a till, put me in a headset, and told the other woman at the till to make me do all the work. I tried my best with zero training or guidance in the middle of a weekday lunch rush in an industrial area. It went badly, fast, mid-order. She grabbed my arm and dragged me into the office. She berated me for a solid 10 minutes, calling me pathetic, disgusting, homeless scum with no manners, saying no one wanted me. No wonder I was homeless. Honestly, it makes me cry thinking about how cruel and harsh she was. She had no idea my parents were beating, starving, and neglecting me. She only saw a young homeless kid. I didn't shed a single tear in front of her. I knew if I cried, well, let's just say I might have been diagnosed with battered women's syndrome much sooner had I had a therapist. I knew not to cry. Finally, she was done. I took off the headset, went to the staff room to change, grabbed my stuff, and left. No one said a word. I just left. Once in the parking lot, just far enough away to be in the same lot, but in front of another business, I fell to my knees and began crying. Rage crying, sobbing, crocodile tears, a full-on breakdown, the kind that feels like it will never end. Someone came up to me and put her arm around me. I just cried in her arms. When I was done, I finally saw who it was, the assistant manager from the exact place I had just left. I was flustered, furious, and embarrassed. She just looked at me and said, "Manager is a bish, so much so that she's actually being fired this week, and I will be promoted to her position." What she did was so wrong. If it's okay with you, I would still like to hire you. I think you would be a great asset. We had a brief discussion about the previous manager, how the owners would hear about what she had done to me, and if I still wanted the job. She told me she would contact me later in the week to arrange a schedule. I went in that Saturday, met the owners before a staff meeting where they introduced the newly promoted manager, explained that the previous manager had been let go, and introduced me to the team. I was offered the job. With a slight wage increase, minimum wage had been around $2.25 per hour, and I was given $2.45 per hour. I worked there for nearly 10 years. I got my high school diploma, went to college, literally became an adult there, and worked my way up the chain of command. Well, as high as I could, since the manager was so incredible. The turnover rate was crazy low. Literally, my best and worst bosses of all time worked there. Being almost 25 to 30 years ago, there was obviously no Facebook, and I haven't kept in touch with much of the crew. But some days I think back on that place, the staff, the customers, the friends, and hope they're all well. Story 29. It's funny, but I don't have a single worst person as much as a worst archetype. At every single job I've had, there's been a middle-aged woman who's been there a ridiculously long time and complains about literally everything. Just belly aches nonstop. Every new thing is an unnecessary imposition. Every day is a titanic struggle. She moans, pouts, and grumbles under her breath. She's not nearly as good at her job as she should be after doing it for 25 years. She shares inappropriately detailed information about her personal life, whether that means who she's dating, her health problems, or her out-of-control teenaged or adult kids. It's always at least one of those. She usually also openly defies the bosses, but nobody really does anything because she's been there longer than any of management. And somehow they're all kind of scared of her. Makes no sense. But there's been one at every job, no matter what kind. I've worked a lot of different jobs since college in a lot of fields. Every office, every warehouse, every coffee shop, every call center has this person. No exceptions. I've come to the conclusion that this kind of person is inevitable and somehow integral to every workplace in a way I can't grasp. In the same way mosquitoes are important to an ecosystem in ways you wouldn't understand until they went extinct, and you wish fervently that they would go extinct when you're covered in itching welts after an otherwise lovely evening at the park, just like you wish fervently that goddamn Linda in accounting would shut up and go work somewhere else if she hates it here so much. But there's an ecological niche that has to be filled. So even if she did put her money where her whiny mouth is and leave, a new Linda would ascend. Whoever was the second most tenured and jaded would take on the mantle and invite all the new hires out for lunch on their first day to tell them how it really is around here. It's just the way of things, not for me to know why, but there has to be one. At this point, I think if I ever got got a job and didn't encounter this person, I'd spend weeks with an uncertain sense of dread about something I couldn't articulate because a workplace where nobody stirs up drama like it's their job would feel wrong. Story 30. I worked at a place similar to the YMCA. They hired a tramp chot gym coach who was great at those things. But somewhere along the line, she also picked up reception shifts. She was also dyslexic. This meant I would get emails I couldn't read, with phone messages for obviously wrong names and phone numbers with missing digits, or when I called them, they turned out to be wrong numbers. The workplace was too scared to move her off reception in case it was considered discrimination. There was plenty of other work to be done, so she didn't need to be fired or anything. Instead of taking a job that wasn't meant to be hers off her plate, the rest of us had to take the abuse from upset clients, because we weren't going to blame her mild disability for failing to call them back. Story 31. This was a tough one because when you work in retail long enough, you will hate a lot of people. My first job in high school had this gremlin who thought she was the crap because she was a varsity cheerleader. She had the worst temper I have ever seen. It was like anger was the only emotion she could feel. She seemed only capable of communicating through yelling, insulting, and berating everyone. Every shift with her was just watching her go through an 8-hour-long tantrum. I wouldn't be surprised if she were still a little friggin' gremlin. Story 32. My current coworker. He loves to watch my work, track my tickets, and wants in on all my meetings. Not to be helpful, but to insert himself into everything I do. If I don't jump on something in 1 minute, he will ask if I missed the email, ticket, or request. Then he plays 20 questions with me like I report to him or something. The worst part is, he isn't mean about it. So I can't say anything because he just says we are a team and work together. So he is helping. I think he is just passive-aggressive and really good at it. Over time, it just gets on my last nerve. Story 33. I can't decide which one to pick. Oddly enough, we all worked in the same quad cube, and their crowning highlight moments both surfaced on the same day. September 11th. One of them spent the whole day stomping around the office, bishing about how she had plans to watch the ball game that night, and now her night was ruined because the game was canceled. And for Chris' sakes, it's not like the planes flew into the stadium. It's just some buildings miles away. The other had some sort of video capture software on his computer and kept replaying clips of people jumping from the burning buildings, cheering and giggling as if he were watching circus clowns. Dude, look, there's another one. Whoa, he bounced off the side, man. That had to hurt. Hey, watch this. Then he'd roll the video backwards and forwards, making a slide whistle noise as the people repeatedly went back and forth. Story 34. Do you want every instruction delivered to you verbally while you're distracted and least expect it? Do you want every directive presented as a fire you need to put out immediately, only to be ended with, you don't have to do it right this second, when you've dropped what you're doing and are halfway through the request that was urgent enough for your boss to come to you instead of writing a frigging email? Do you want to be interrupted 5 minutes after the last interruption, consistently for years on end, effectively training you not to try to work because you're just going to be thrown off track right when you get into it? Try working for my dad. Alcoholism subsidized by paying you more than you're worth. Actual frigging quote from my supposedly loving father. Story 35. I've had a bunch, but bag salad was the worst. It was my job to train her on a position only I knew how to do, and they lied when they said I would definitely be involved in the interview process. I'm still not sure why. They did that. No hyperbole, but I friggin' crushed that job. Exemplary reviews every year. And positive relationships all around. I didn't need or want the help, but they said they were hiring her for the anticipated future workload. It's been so long I don't even remember why she got that nickname, but it really suited her somehow. She was gluten-free, and whenever food came up in any conversation she could overhear, she would bring that up, and she spoke in a confused sing-song way like, oh, I'm not sure if I can have that. Do Twizzlers have gluten? I'm gluten-free. She didn't understand how to take messages, reply to or forward emails, or print anything. She spoke to herself all day long in this half-whisper, lip-smacking way like, okay, if I just copy, oh no, maybe move it, but okay, maybe I'll, and would then turn to me with buggy eyes, waiting for me to acknowledge her rather than just asking. Her nose whistled with every breath, but when she breathed through her mouth, she would smack her lips or tongue. She loved Big Bang Theory and would regale me with the plot lines of episodes she'd watch, including, and then the Sheldon, goes Bazinga, and oh, how I laughed. Goodness, it's so funny. Hee hee. She felt the need to jump in on every conversation she could overhear. If I was talking to a friend about a trip or something, me. Man, Chicago was great. I hope I can go again someday. Her. Oh, I never went to Chicago, but my uncle's friend did in the 80s, and he said he had fun. He used to have a garage where he built widgets. And one time his wife crashed their car in the city they lived. Was it town A? Town B? I'm not sure, but she was really nice this one time. I frigging hated her. I know it sounds like a woman out of her depth who was just trying to fit in, and that's true. But some people just grate, and she freaking grated every last nerve and ounce of patience I had. I tried, I couldn't hack it, and I quit that job 2 months after she started. Story 35. Many years ago, when I was young and working in a kitchen, I worked for a few months with a guy who was a complete nutcase. He was mid-late 30s, super smart, and educated in a self-taught way, but he was one of those guys who would get angry at the slightest bit of stress. The sort who never gets aggressive towards people, but towards objects, punching walls, slamming pans on the counter, that kind of thing. He was only 5 feet 5-ish, 152 centimeters, but worked out and was buff as hell. He had a crap ton of jobs before our place and apparently never stayed at one place for more than a few months. In retrospect, I figure he probably had a lot of unmet potential and was very frustrated. Anyway, working with him was pretty intimidating, particularly as I was young at the time. Thinking back, I don't think he was trying to be intimidating. He was just so angry that that's how he was. He really didn't give a crap about customers' food, and there's one incident that really stands out. We were pretty busy, and he was putting a pizza in a box for takeout when he slipped, and the whole thing fell cheese down on the floor. The filthy floor with crap all over it. "It's not my fault. It's not my fault," he muttered to himself as he slid a board under it and flipped it into a box. It looked like crap, so he wiped some of the crap off, threw in some herbs, and sent it out. It was passable, I suppose, but pretty gross. One of those little things that keeps me up at night is that I never stepped in and got it remade. I guess I was probably a little afraid of him. Anyway, maybe I just work with a lot of great people, but he was the worst. Story 36. I worked at a foreign embassy years ago, and let's just say the work culture and interactions between different tiers of employees were very different from what I was used to. Hands down, the worst. Example of this was the ambassador himself. He would regularly have screaming temper tantrums whenever someone disrespected him or otherwise did something he didn't like. And I mean literal screaming at a volume that could be heard throughout the entire 3-story house. He only did this to the employees from his own country, not the native hires, so I didn't get to see it up close, but I heard it plenty of times. Also, we live in one of the most peaceful countries on the planet and have strict gun laws, but because he was a diplomat, he could willy-nilly buy himself a gun, which he did, and then he walked around with it in his pocket, from where it randomly dropped out to be found in odd places around the embassy. This impressed the other diplomats so much that they all went out and got guns too. Story 37. Academics. He was department chair and happened to be my direct report. Pervasive, persistent, and raging with narcissistic personality disorder. He possessed the most devastating passive-aggressive weapon I have ever come across. If he didn't like you, he would mess up your career. For example, letting a faculty member's research grant application sit on his desk right until the deadline, then informing him or her that he wasn't going to sign it because he had concerns. This happened more than once. No department chair signature on the application, and most funding agencies won't even consider your application. At one point, he was banging the department vice chair, someone he had direct authority over. During that relationship, he also started doinking one of his own graduate students, who he also had direct power over. They didn't know about each other. After a while, the graduate student ended the relationship. He went fatal attraction, sabotaged her work, passively aggressively, of course. She filed suit. Most of his shenanigans became disclosed. In fact, his downfall was so spectacular in public that his narcissistic personality disorder short-circuited his brain into a several-week psychosis. Story 38. She was incapable of using anything more technologically advanced than a calculator without serious intensive training. We worked in an office where everything was done on computers. She was slow, rude, unproductive, horrible with clients, expected preferential treatment for the same work as everyone else in the same job, and always looking for a way to push her workload onto someone else. When I started my job, she cottoned on that I was technical, had a decent understanding of Office or Windows very quickly, and would head straight for my desk if she had any issues. I worked with her for 10 years and showed her more times than I can count how to put an out-of-office message on. She never remembered anything she was shown. By the time she quit, hearing her say, "Can you help me?" made me die inside because what she really meant was, "Can you do it for me while I D around on my phone?" She'd also yell at you if you couldn't drop everything and do it right now. I once watched her spend 10 minutes trying to understand why the printer she was using wasn't printing. It was one of the big office ones with multiple trays that helpfully tells you on the little screen that the tray is empty and shows you how to refill it. She was putting the paper on the little tray that folds up and not understanding why it still wouldn't print. I went to the canteen, made a coffee, came back to my desk, and she was still huffing and puffing at it before eventually, "Can you help me?" She'd put in her notice by now, and I was done with her crap because she was so unpleasant to work with, so I got up, walked over to the printer, put a ream of paper in the right tray, shut it, and walked back to my desk without a word. The best thing I can say for her is that when I trained people on software or processes, I'd write the guide, check back over it, think, where would Dumma stop me, and start yelling about not understanding and make it even simpler. Just in case, story 39. This dude we all called Pockets had a crew of about 12 journeyman painters who were always on point, except Pockets. Pockets could be found smoking out in the porta potty. Pockets could be found on the opposite side of the building we were painting. Pockets could also be found on his phone, texting his nasty A-girlfriend. Pockets would be found walking 2 blocks away from our job site. One time, we didn't see Pockets for damn near an hour. We found Pockets when we took our lunch break. Know where Pockets was? At the exact same Burger King we went to. Pockets had already been there for at least 45 minutes from what the cute counter girl said. Pockets was being paid $2 an hour more than me. Pockets was caught sprinkling meth on a fat bowl by the boss. I got a $2 raise when Pockets was fired. Nobody talks to Pockets. Don't be like Pockets. Story 40. Oh, how to choose. I think it was the Bish duo, honestly. They were both terrible on their own, but together they became utterly insufferable. Bish 1 was this super spoiled rich girl. She got a house for agreeing not to marry a woman instead of a man. Clearly not too committed to the woman, so I don't feel too bad. That her parents are homophobic, I mean, because clearly she is profiting. She also got a brand new fancy car when she crashed her old one. She made very little money, all from Daddy-O. Anyway, her personality was shallow, insipid, and she made up for lack of depth by being a sarcastic a-hole and stereotypical mean girl. Bish 1 had connections, so despite actively abandoning anesthesia patients she was supposed to be monitoring, she still kept her job. Bish 2 was Bish 1's friend that she got hired. She was somehow 50 times worse. She was openly rude and aggressive, said it was just because she was blunt, and sneering was her default expression. Bish 2 had like 10 complaints logged against her within the first 2 months, but they didn't want to fire her because we had a new staff manager who was an absolutely useless, cowardly waste of money. Together, they basically talked crap about every other person in the small, family-owned building. If you ran afoul of one, the other would magically appear to back her up. They were horrible harpies that deserved to be incinerated and made the work environment utterly toxic. 2 girls quit before I did. One after logging multiple complaints and even calling in for mental health because I can't handle them today. I lined up another job and frigging dipped, and I don't miss the Bish duo whatsoever. Story 41. I had a coworker who would watch me work. Our desks were sort of offset, but we had our backs to each other. She would turn around in her chair and just watch me. I would only realize it was happening when she commented on something on my screen, so it wasn't even like she tried to hide it. I did my best to ignore it, but drew the line when she put a mirror on her desk positioned just right, so she could see both of my monitors without having to turn around. Story 42. I used to work for a 20-person company, and they hired a guy to manage our department of 4. 1 week in, he was sick and shoved a tissue up his nose and left it hanging out of his nostril. He then went into a client meeting with the tissue still up there. 2 weeks in, we had some wine on a Friday afternoon in the office. A coworker asked him why he had put ice cubes in his glass, and he said casually that he had put Tito's in it. All in all, I believe he only worked at the company for 3 months, but in that time, he was just a garbage human and impossible to work with. After he was fired, he stole his work laptop and eventually snuck it back into the office after he found out charges were being pressed. Story 43. A homeless guy moved from Las Vegas to my town. We were working security on a movie set. I already worked production, but there were 3 films in town, so I picked up some security shifts on the weekend. I told him up and down not to touch the condor. It looks like this. Link. I adamantly warned him not to mess with the condor. I turned the corner in the second hour of the shift, and he had it lifted to a window of a nearby house. Dude was creepy as hell in the first place. He was off the clock an hour later, then came back drunk. These were 16-hour shifts. Had to call the cops. They tased him. Heck of a memory. Story 44. The CEO's girlfriend was a devout vegan who would patrol the office around lunch to make sure that anyone eating meat promised not to use the sponge in the kitchen to wash anything that meat had touched. She did this in yoga pants and heels, but because her personality sucked, she wasn't remotely attractive. For April Fool's Day, I rinsed out a carton of chicken broth, filled it with mango juice, and made a point of pouring myself a glass and drinking it in front of her. She was disgusted, so it was twice as delicious. Edit. She was both the financial manager and the HR person, so every problem that anyone had at the company became pillow talk between her and her fiancé, and he would sprinkle in the things she told him at meetings as if the problems were supposed to be common knowledge. This pair was a piece of work. He had been overheard saying, "I wouldn't care if I didn't hear music again in my life." Who says that? Sociopaths. That's who. I was eventually fired, and the official reason was that I had photoshopped grotesque images of several people in the office. What she failed to mention to the Department of Labor rep was that I had done it on my own time, on my own computer, and each coworker had requested I do them next after I initially just did it to myself. My own photo just had my eyes moved farther apart, so I looked abnormal, but not outside the realm of possibility. For other coworkers, I flipped their faces upside down, made their eyes too big, removed their noses or facial hair, or covered their mouths with beards. During my Department of Labor chat to work out my unemployment, the agent asked me to email her the photos, and it made her audibly laugh. Being fired was worth it just for that. Story 45. I worked retail with a guy once who was the worst. He would always go to the gym before work and would never shower. He stank so bad. He was also a self-important person who thought he knew everything. He wouldn't let his girlfriend even get a haircut without clearing it with him first. He never said it, but you could tell he thought men were much better at everything than women. He would regularly come and do my jobs without me asking, jobs I was very capable of doing myself. I would just tell him to piss off. Story 46. The guy who would work 11 to 7:30 instead of 9 to 5:30, claiming cancer remission made the morning hard for him, but never proving it no matter how often HR requested something from his doctor. Not turn up for work and not call in, again, cancer, totaled 30 days off sick in 6 months, more than a day a week. Claim he'd done work, but you'd never see any evidence. The week he got a work laptop, claimed his mother was in hospital, so he'd work from the hospital, which turned out to be a week-long bender in London with his mates. I was nominally the junior who was still in training at that point. He was the one training me. After the bender, he got fired, and my boss and I started looking into things. He had done nothing beyond posting cash, not always accurately, to customer accounts. Invoices were wrong. Customers had asked questions which he hadn't answered for weeks, implying that training me was taking too much time, even though he and I were only in the office together for like 4.5 hours a day out of his 7.5 hours. No reconciliations were completed, and this went on. It took my boss and me 6 months to get to a basic, this is all right data position, and another 6 months to get it running like we wanted it to. Story 47. A manager at my very first job ever, a cashier at a dollar store. She would constantly belittle me in front of other people over the smallest things, and despised children in our store acting anything less than absolutely perfect. Mid to late 60s, dyed red hair, and yes, her name was Carol. Once, during the December rush, I had called in saying that I was sick and had spent all of last night violently throwing up. She said that if I wanted to keep my job, I had to come in. So I came in. Every single person in my line for the first 2 hours of my shift noted how terrible I looked. And why was I there? There was one lady, a blonde mom, she told me so, in her early 30s. I was ringing up her items, mostly groceries. When I felt that pang in my stomach, I said with my best corporate smile, "Please excuse me." For one moment, miss. I then bent over and violently threw up into the tiny trash can we kept underneath the registers. I wiped my mouth with my arm and continued to ring up her things as if nothing happened. She asked me what I was doing. I told her I couldn't go home if I wanted to keep my job. This woman was pissed. She got Carol and demanded to know why she let sick young people come in feeling this awful. I was 18 at the time. Carol tried to brush it off, saying I was fine. This mom wouldn't budge. She said that I from corporate was a friend of hers and she was going to let her know exactly what kind of manager Carol was being. Carol's eyes got big. She told me to go home immediately. I said I would empty my trash, clock out, and leave. Carol said she'd take care of it. I still felt terrible, but at least my job was safe. Until January, when I went in to get my hours for the week. Carol hated proper calling in for that. I was told I was being let go. Cuts had to be made. A bunch of crap. Story 48. The ones who don't tell you they have too much work. In my culture, people believe you have to multitask and bear as much work as possible. However, it's unrealistic. Those who follow this are usually unreliable. I had one who was always late to submit his work because he had too much and treated everything as a priority. His delays led to disrupted arrangements. Yes, he was hardworking, but could not be relied on. I would say the lack of communication is worse than incompetence. I need to know someone's difficulties so I can arrange work better. Since he was also my friend, I trained him to reject my or my boss's offers whenever he felt pressured. It worked well, as he was comfortable saying no. Story 49. We have this Italian woman at my work whose regular speaking voice is so loud you can hear her across the building when she's talking to someone beside her. She is untouchable as far as being penalized for anything is concerned and barely does any actual work. At one point years ago, she decided to try driving a forklift and drove it through a bathroom wall that was luckily empty. I think she almost got a slap on the wrist for that one. A manager once had the balls to assign her to train a new worker. She treated him so badly that by the end of his second day, he cut 2 of the tires on her car as he walked off the job. Surprisingly, she did actually get temporarily suspended after that incident, and we had a few team meetings about bullying in the workplace. Those of us who have been here longer know that if we want a process changed or have ideas, we don't tell management because they don't care. We tell her instead. And she gets management to implement it before she finishes pitching it. Story 50. I got promoted from cocktail waitress to bartender the night the manager overheard the bartender ask me, literally in so many words, what goes in a rum and coke? No idea how she got hired. The Other waitresses used to mess with her by ordering 2 screwdrivers and 2 vodka and orange juices. Decades ago, no POS system. We just verbally placed orders. She'd very carefully differentiate the drinks, like the ones with 2 straws are the screwdrivers. At another job, I was trying to help hire and train someone to cover my role during maternity leave, and later, when I was moving away and had given notice, met some real winners. The lady who assured us she was computer literate then picked up the mouse to touch the monitor screen to click on a cell. The lady who came to work in a dusty wig, inappropriate clothing, and couldn't understand why one of the big rules for the job was no fraternizing with clientele. The lady hired for a night audit job who trained for 2 weeks of nights and quit a week later because she didn't know the job would be overnight all the time. Bless her heart, she honestly had issues that needed attention, like carrying her dog's ashes everywhere because she was terrified someone would break into her house to steal them. Nice lady, just a little fuzzy around the edges. My last hotel job introduced me to the 2 absolute worst coworkers, though. The owner hired a maintenance dude without checking any of his credentials. Dude turned out to be a crackhead, a grifter, and had more than a handful of violent felonies. And the aforementioned owner. She was so greedy that she would make unethical and illegal business decisions if it saved money in the short term, like hiring a maintenance guy who couldn't fix anything and was a threat to guest and employee safety, or knowingly renting 2 floors of guest rooms with bad phone wiring. Illegal and unsafe. I quit the job and the industry I loved because of her. Story 51. I work in a large company, but the office group I'm in is small. One of the leads on the factory floor has a crush on a woman in my office. He stops by multiple times per day, even though his shift and hers only overlap by 4 hours. She's about 15 years younger than he is. They're both married, not to each other, obviously. She is Facebook friends with his wife. She has no interest in him at all, but he acts like everyone believes he's just being social. She doesn't want to rock the boat by complaining, so we all have to put up with him stopping by to flirt and make small talk. If she's there, he won't speak to me at all, maybe just mutter hi. He won't try to socialize with me if any other woman is around. The last time he did chat with me, it was to tell me how bad it smelled on the pig farm where he grew up. I was eating lunch at the time. Once she was reassigned to another city, we knew she would be gone for weeks or months and told everyone. There's a company-wide daily newsletter every weekday that includes off-site announcements. For the first 2 weeks, she was gone. He still stopped by every day to see if she was back. Finally, he came in once when I was the only one there and I snapped at him. She's still working at place and she'll definitely be there at least through the end of next week, probably longer. We'll make sure to let you know when she comes back. I didn't raise my voice, just used a firm tone and cut out all the nicely nice social crap he's used to. After that, he stopped coming around every day. I'd see him slow down when he walked past our office windows. If it looks like I'm the only one there, he won't stop in. Damn. Now where will I get my nauseating pig stories? Story 52? This might not seem that bad if you haven't worked with someone like this, but mine was an overly dramatic coworker. She would come in and start complaining about traffic as if no one had ever experienced something so awful. Then she would complain about everyone in the office. So-and-so has been at lunch for a while. Must be nice. Then loudly complain as people left that she had to stay because she apparently thought she had more work than anyone else. Reality was, while she was complaining, we were working. It's draining being around someone like that every day. Story 53. The person I work with at the minute. The whole office agrees that she is insane. She once didn't speak to anyone but the men in the office for an entire month. There are so many small details that would make me sound petty, but become grating when you deal with them every day. The one everyone can agree on, though, is the mood swings. She can be fine 1 minute and gone off the next. It'll be an hour before I can work again because I have to talk her down. No matter what job I take after this and who I work with, it will never not amaze me that I spent a chunk of my life babysitting someone who is 15 years older than me. Story 54. This gets a bit tech heavy, but any coder would know this is the worst guy on the planet. I'm a software engineer and I work with one other guy in a company currently. He was there years before me and has engineered everything up to this point. Everybody in the company knows him as the SOC tech guy, and all of my decisions are run through him. I can't build anything without him questioning me or my methods, and he constantly undermines me. The reason this is bad is that he's the worst coder I've ever seen. Not just professionally, I haven't known anyone this bad, even as a hobbyist. He codes everything in line, doesn't use functions, schanda, and is quoted saying, "I don't use include files with a bunch of hidden functions. They just slow me down." He yelled at me for creating a logging class that centralizes our logs, claiming it caused huge lag spikes because it would take 10 to 15 seconds to close the log so the next guy could come in, creating a queue, and that my log files were way too big and causing an issue. Utter BS. My log files were at most 10 megabytes. I created a script that used the same logging class to log 1,000 entries into a big file and a small file, timing the process to show him that A, the size of the log, doesn't cause more time in writing the file, and B, You can write to these files 1,000 times in less than 1/50th of a second. Everything he said was garbage. Not only did he berate me in front of everyone, claiming I was wasting time, he made up more nonsense to justify himself. The worst part is that I know how horrible he is. But since he's been coding in a vacuum with these people, nobody else knows. They have nothing to compare it to. They just think that normal coders don't paginate tables, so it takes 4 minutes and 2 gigabytes of RAM to load a page. Because of that, and because he craps on any progress I try to make, he makes more than me, is listened to more than me, and I have no way to move past him. The only thing I can do to keep my sanity is sandbag my coding to his level and stop taking things so seriously. God, I hate this job. Story 55. Current newest hire at a bakery I work at. He nailed the interview, former kitchen manager at multiple well-off restaurants, worked at a few bakeries, etc. Dude can't measure anything. Everything is consistently wrong. He doesn't clean up, he smells, comes in late, leaves early. If you try to fix the issue or show him how to do something correctly, or that he did something wrong, he just gives you that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.